I'm going to present our first polling question to the audience, which we are going to revisit here shortly when we have polling results pulled up and have a brief discussion about. So here's the question to the audience. Are you leveraging partnerships or funding from public health agencies to support the development of therapeutic candidates in your pipelines? Yes, no, or not sure. Go ahead and make your selections now. And as I said momentarily, we will revisit those results and have a brief discussion about them. But yeah, to dig into, following up on that polling question, I want to present to our panel the question, what is the fundamental role of public and private partnerships in replicating successes and correcting mistakes? So I guess it's narrowing down. Public-private partnerships have been around for a long time, but they've changed, I think, in the context of the past 24 months. So narrowing it down to replicating successes and correcting mistakes for the next public health emergency. What is the role of public-private partnership? And John, since I've still got you on my screen, I'll start with your response.
Sure. So thanks, Matt. I think to me, looking at what are the existing mechanisms that early stage companies utilize as public-private partnerships. So for one, federal government does a nice job of seeding early stage innovation through their SBIR programs. That's basically the federal government seed program where they can get things that wouldn't typically attract private capital. They can utilize that federal funding to get them a little bit further de-risked so that they might become more marketable. Then we have the whole kind of context of the regulatory process through which government and industry are just very commonly working together through that piece. And then I don't think it should be undercut as well the role that academia plays in this, where the federal funding that goes to support academic research at our colleges and universities across the country, across the globe, is a great place where a lot of this early innovation that may not be market-driven gets started and gets funded and is then able to be leveraged by industry to respond to an issue like this.
Excellent. Adrian, I'm going to turn to you and turn to you for the UK perspective on that, the fundamental role of public and private partnerships.
Yeah, I think some parallels there. I think public and private investment needs to be made, particularly around supporting some of the very early development where there's substantive risk. I also think that, again, as I said in the outset, the role of some of public funds needs to be focused at that strategic long-term preparedness. And I think there was a good point made just earlier where, I don't think any nation was prepared for what we've just been through within COVID-19 and the pandemic. However, there's been enough indications over the last 15, 20 years that a pandemic of that magnitude was coming. So I think, there is that responsibility. I think we've got to kind of join the dots up here between public and private funding, but certainly that public funding needs to be focused on that more strategic preparedness.
Jeff, before I move on to you with that question, I want to, so there was a question from the audience that speaks directly to a point that Adrian just made about balancing short-term and long-term goals as a company. So I'm going to open that question up a little bit. It's a bit bigger a question. And Jeff, I want your opinion on this too, because you're in the throes of it. So the question is from Scott. What are the keys to balancing a long-term opportunity focus with legitimate shorter-term business imperatives? And I interpret that question, I look at a company like Heat, Jeff, and I say, okay, the company's been around for a few years. You've got a full pipeline of candidates that are making good progress. And along comes a pandemic. And per the point we made, every emerging biopharma company became a COVID-19 company when the pandemic struck. How do you go about, as the leader of an emerging biopharma company or an established biopharma company for that matter, how do you go about reconciling the short-term opportunity that a public health emergency presents with managing the existing mission of the business And I'm going to throw part two into that question. How do you leverage public resources to enable the first part, to kind of help support the first part?
No, that's a great question.
I want to get your opinion on that.
No, it's a great question. And it touches upon what Adrian just said a few moments ago. So, you know, the role for public should be to come in when the capitalist system can support these sorts of efforts. So there are adequate funding mechanisms in place for biotech companies to pursue commercial drugs and commercial programs. But something like this that was so unexpected, that requires such long-term development efforts for events that may or may not ever happen, you know, it's not a place where private companies, most private companies can really put their cash on these binary events, especially small private companies. And to Adrian's point, I think that's really where the government should come in terms of balancing very long-term initiatives versus shorter-term initiatives, more commercial initiatives. We as a biotech company really need to, you know, to focus on programs that have commercial application that aren't so binary in the event of, you know, things like biological threats, which may or may not hit or may not mutate. So, but there are real needs out there, real commercial needs out there that companies like ours need to address. So that's really what we're focused on. But if we have a technology that could lend itself to something like COVID-19, companies like ours really need financial support from the agencies to really apply those programs to these threats that were unexpected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. I want to take a look at the polling results before I forget to do that. Let's throw those polling results up there. So it looks like half of our audience says they're not leveraging partnerships or funding from public health agencies to support their development. Good chunk are not sure, but it looks like a missed opportunity to me. Panel, thoughts on that? Jeff,
an immediate sort of
go ahead, Adrian.
Sorry, Adrian here. Yeah, an immediate sort of response for me. Maybe that reflects the sort of the challenges that enter into the sort of public funding arena. So certainly in the UK, it can be a challenging process. It can be a time-consuming process, and maybe sometimes, particularly smaller companies, find that burden too much. And one of the feedback that we've certainly been giving the UK government is you need to make this much sharper and simpler. So that may be a reflection of people's preparedness to apply for that sort of funding.
Interested in your response to that, John. John Weaver. Adrian just mentioned the difficulty, the challenge, perhaps the complexity of pursuing that kind of support in the UK. What do you see here in the States?
So I think I think he's right, and I think it ties back to something that Jeff said earlier too, which is that, you know, really companies, in order to get enough capital to bring a product all the way to market and, you know, to then be able to return on it for investors, there has to be a large enough consistent market to be able to support that. And a lot of times, you know, the areas in which the public, you know, the government is supporting, they're doing that because that market doesn't fully exist. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that most companies aren't using that, but it does, you know, I do think it is an opportunity for some companies where they can use that if they're in an industry where they're not fully venture funded and they need additional support, use that for some early proof of concept, use that to get some early clinical data in, use that to then, you know, and then be able to leverage that into a platform technology that has other market applications. So I think if you're looking at going after a kind of public health focused business, you really need to look at it in the context of how is that one part of a larger market strategy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, excellent. Where do I go? You know, if I'm part of that 50% that perhaps, you know, that answered no in our poll, and you know, maybe, I don't know, let me assume that 30% of those 50 of that 50% answered no because they don't know how. They don't know what's available. They don't know where to start. Maybe 20% says it's not worth it. We're well healed. I don't know. they know for a different reason. But if I don't know, what's available to me and where I can find it, where do I start? Is there a consultancy? Is there some sort of guidance? Is there a cottage industry of Sherpas out there who can guide you through the labyrinth of public support for projects like this?
So there's a whole industry. So first of all, at the various companies at the very earliest stage, the government does have a small business development circuit network that is throughout the country that companies can tap into for early SBIR support. Later on, though, there's a bunch of consultants that are out there that can help them identify and then write applications to these federal programs for funding. And frankly, there's a lot of talent in the industry as well that's very familiar with how to access those and utilize those. I'd also just note that a conversation is usually a good idea as well. So find the program officer who's in your space within the federal government and start that dialogue with them, because a lot of times if they're aware of the technology that you have, there's a whole host of other opportunities that can be available for